Hello there, everybody. I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. Now, today we're going to be talking about a different kind of movie. We're going to talk about a documentary, and this documentary is called Billie Eilish, The World is a Little Blurry. Now, when I first heard about this, I just kind of saw a trailer thing online saying that Apple Movies was putting this out, which, on a side note, how is Apple Movies doing? I'm not saying they don't have good content. I just feel like don't really hear about them very much, but they did a pretty good job in grabbing this Billie Eilish documentary, being that Billie Eilish is one of the biggest stars on the planet. Like, let's just be real. If you're trying to deny that, it's delusional. She's one of the biggest artists on the planet, and she's so young. I think she became world famous by the time she was 17, 18. I think she's 19 now. She just recently turned 19. But she's a super huge artist, and of course, like any successful artist, usually a company's gonna want to cash in on that popularity by making a documentary film, usually like a loose documentary film chronicling a star's life. But one of the things I have noticed about Billie Eilish as an artist is that she's not like a typical pop artist for the most part. Like, her music's fairly dark, and her imagery is fairly dark. If you've ever seen any of her music videos, I'll put something up right here so you can kind of get a little look-see. It's distinct, especially for someone her age. And so I was wondering what this film was going to be. And I would say, for the most part, I think the movie is a success. There are certain things that I'm usually looking for in a documentary, especially of a pretty prominent public figure. So let's get into this right now. One of the things I'll give the movie credit for is that it is structured pretty loose, and it doesn't seem overly stylized. They have a lot of times where there's big chunks of the movie that it just looks like it's shot on one of their cell phones. It could be her recording music backstage at a show, or just giving her thoughts and whatnot. And it does add this intimacy that a normal biopic, not even biopic, normal kind of documentary movie maybe wouldn't have, especially for an artist as successful as she is. Usually in those kind of movies, you can feel the record label and the PR people heavily managing that movie, because it's like a piece of artist propaganda, right? They want something that will hold over the fans and give them a peek into an artist's life, but nothing too scandalous, nothing too crazy, but still capitalizing and making money off of this artist's fame. And I would say this movie, it's still doing that kind of thing, but adding those cell phone shots really does switch it up. I don't know if it's just that if you're someone who's online a lot, or if you're a Gen Z kind of person, you're used to seeing the cell phone footage, right? It allows people to, you literally have a camera everywhere, for better and for worse. And I definitely think it helps this move out a little bit. I also like the insight this movie gives on Gen Z. I'm a millennial, so I'm what Gen Z would consider an old man. But it is interesting seeing this generation that is coming up behind my generation, because when I look at them, I can see what parts of their generation are sort of parts of our generation, but expanded, right? Like, my generation was definitely born into the internet, right? But I still had about a decade before the internet really was a really accessible thing, while they were born right into it, some of these kids probably turned 8 when the iPhone came out and whatnot. So, and also just kind of seeing the way through Billie Eilish, this icon that Gen Z has chosen, and part of the reason why she has rocketed up to fame, and sort of seeing some of their ideals and what about her as an artist appeals to them. And I think the movie definitely gets into that. Like, I definitely think Gen Z, I know they get blamed for stuff and whatnot. I'd say necessarily none of it is their fault, but as someone who's a millennial, and if you read a bunch of news stories about millennials, we get blamed for all kinds of things and whatnot. But with Gen Z, I definitely see this thing of, you have this generation who was born into pretty crappy world circumstances, right? Like, these are the kids who were born into 9/11. I'm talking as American, of course, but I know worldwide that's a bunch of stuff going on. Born into 9/11. They're born into the stock market crashing. They're born into this internet addiction technology, and they're born right into it, and seeing the world just kind of go to crap, but they're also a generation who has been able to look behind the curtain the most, just because they've grown up, because the internet is revealing, pulling this curtain back of how politics is working, how people are treating other people, that they're a generation who is very aware of this sort of public image as well. And you see a lot of those values reflected back in an artist like Billie Eilish. But let's get more into the star of the project, Billie Eilish. One of the things I do like about this movie is that usually when you see a documentary like this, it is a bit of an artist propaganda, right? So they don't tend to show the rough edges. But in this movie, they are not shy about showing that Billie is... I do think Billie is a talented artist, and that she is, for the most part, unproblematic. I haven't really heard stuff very problematic about her. But the movie does not shy away from the fact that she is a teenager, you know what I mean? And if you remember being a teenager, you're feeling stuff for the first time, you're going through a lot of stuff. So sometimes she can be moody, she can be disagreeable, and she can be just downright negative when you're watching some of this documentary stuff. And they don't shy away from that, which I think actually is a good thing to show, that it's not all glamorous in the life of a starlet like her. I think one of the things, too, the movie does a good job of is... It's not heavy-handed with it, but you do see some of the downfalls of fame. She is one of the most famous people on the planet at the age of, I mean, she's 19 now, but at the age of 17, she was pretty much worldwide famous, you know, going to Grammys and whatnot. But the movie does not shy away from the fact that fame, it's not all it's cracked up to be. So there's moments in this movie where you see her, like, she had a relationship with this guy, this other artist. I forget his name. I think they call him Q and whatnot. And you see as the fame starts to mess up their relationship because of her schedule and her commitment, she can't be by him. And you see it as the movie goes on, of their relationship slowly straining and breaking apart. You also see little moments of, as much fame and power as she has, she's not necessarily free. You know, they have her on this schedule of doing these tours and these interviews, and there's moments where she's in foreign lands and whatnot, and she wants to just go to a park, but she can't do it. So you do give up some freedom in that respect. They also go into mental health stuff. She's someone who suffers from Tourette's, and I've known people in my life who've had Tourette's, and I've heard that stress and whatnot and anxiety can exacerbate the symptoms of Tourette's. And you see moments in this movie where she's having Tourette's, I don't know if they're called Tourette's attacks, but you can see the Tourette's starting to be exacerbated and coming through in her physical expression. There's even a moment in the movie where she's having one of these, I guess, Tourette attacks, and she's had it so often that she's talking through it while it's happening, you know? And I couldn't help but wonder if this sort of famous musician lifestyle is exasperating it, especially when she's a teenager. And you also see just the bodily injuries. I mean, they do go into some topics of Billie Eilish with self-harm and whatnot. They don't show anything graphic or anything with that, but they do get into it because her music is known for being dark and depressive. And they get into some of that mental health, but also just the strain that the life of touring and performing, especially as energetically as she does, it's taking a toll on her body. Actually, now that I think of it, the thing it kind of reminds me of is when I watched the Netflix Lady Gaga documentary a couple of years ago. There's a portion of it where she's suffering from this chronic pain that definitely came on through the act of being a performing artist, and you see it with Billie Eilish, but it does make me concerned. I was concerned when I saw Lady Gaga going through it, but I'm especially more concerned seeing Billie Eilish going through it, because at the time in the movie anyway, she's a child. Like, it definitely made me wonder if fame is something, especially as famous as she is, if fame is something that a person as young as her, I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly, as young as she is, should have. And I wonder at times if it's robbing her from the experience of just being a normal person, or even just being a normal teenager at times. And I like the fact that the movie doesn't really give any thoughts on it necessarily. It just lets you see it, and you kind of just... these are things that just naturally were coming up in my head as I was watching it go on, which I think documentaries that I like a lot have that kind of feel to them. I do like the fact that the movie gets into the musical process. You see many things with her and her brother recording songs, and they don't just show it like something like a Bohemian Rhapsody where it's just like, oh, these songs spontaneously come out of nowhere. You see the struggle of working out melodies, butting heads when it comes to the way the music should sound. You even see the process of the business side of the music, right? Where you have this teenager who has all this power and you're wanting her to make music, but you're seeing this thing of the sort of logic of business butting up against the aspect of creativity, which creativity is not on a schedule. Inspiration does not just come out of nowhere. You can cultivate habits that make it easier, but also she's a teenager, so there's times where you see her and her brother butting heads about the way the song should sound or the melody and whatnot, and talking about making music that's more accessible compared to music that is more experimental, and they're kind of casually talked about. They're not heavy-handed, but you're seeing this sort of music business struggle going on, and it is interesting. Another thing I want to talk about is that her brother, I actually sort of kind of wish he had a little bit more screen time. Of course, I understand the target audience, they're there for Billie Eilish, of course, but I found the aspect of her brother really interesting because her career really is a bit of a family affair. You know, her brother is her producer, but in the movie you also see that the record label, I don't know if it's the record label or maybe he's also her brother, so he loves her, is trying to protect her, but Phineas is having to do this delicate tightrope thing of being an artist and creating with Billie Eilish, his sister, and also sort of, you can tell he's hearing the more business side of it because he's an adult. I think he's about 24, 25, and you get little brief glimpses of him talking about, you know, Billie's not wanting to do this song or do this kind of thing, but the record label's saying we need to make a hit. And those little moments that you see, I find really interesting, and I hope it does get a glimpse to musicians out there of how difficult it can be when your art becomes commodified in that sort of way. I definitely like that. And like I said before, this movie definitely is a family affair. Her family is a big part of the movie. You know, you're constantly hearing from her mom. I think her mom's name is Maggie, and every now and then you hear from her father. And it's interesting because you have this thing where, you know, Billie Eilish is very young, she's a teenager, she's very rebellious, and you're seeing as she's dealing with this fame and this media circus running around her, and then her parents, who are older, and they seem like pretty good parents to me, of making sure to check Billie sometimes, but also to give her advice about how she should handle certain things. And it's interesting seeing that. That is definitely an element that when I think about other sort of documentary capturing the rise of a star's kind of fame, that like you see their family, but you don't see them as heavily as you see them in a movie like this. And I did enjoy seeing that kind of stuff because especially with her father, only because her father speaks less, you get moments of insight from them, and it's interesting. I'm glad that they included that kind of stuff. It makes me feel better about the fact that she's not working alone. You also get it where there's other celebrities who make cameos. You have it where there's a pretty humorous moment where Orlando Bloom shows up and she doesn't really know who he is at first, which is really funny. It definitely made me go in my head, man. It made me think, man, fame is fleeting, because I can remember around the time that The Lord of the Rings came out and Pirates of the Caribbean, that Orlando Bloom was a big star. You know what I mean? He was a big star, but how time makes it where you're relevant one moment and you're not as relevant the next moment. But also they have it where Katy Perry shows up, and what I like about some of the moments where she's meeting celebrities, especially celebrities who are similar to her, is you see this sort of camaraderie where these stars are not just talking to Billie Eilish because she's the next hottest thing, but you can tell they admire her, but they're also concerned, having gone through their own trials and tribulations with the industry, especially if you look at someone like a Katy Perry. I'm not going to really go through her career, but Katy Perry's gone through a lot of stuff in the industry. So you see them trying to help Billie Eilish and lend their support, because I think as someone grows in their fame and popularity, and you do see it in this movie where Billie is starting to get more alienated to a certain extent, that it's harder and harder to possibly find people who you can talk to who understand where you're coming from, in the sense that they have also achieved that same sort of sense of fame. So I do like that. And in that, what I would sort of reiterate is that they have it where Justin Bieber, he's actually a really sort of looming figure in this movie, because Billie Eilish is not shy about her fandom as a Justin Bieber fan. Because think about it, she's really young. So at the peak of Justin Bieber's sort of come up and fame, she was definitely part of his fan base. And you see this interesting dynamic of Justin Bieber sort of being this elder statesman in pop, which is weird because he's only really 25, but he was discovered at like 14, 15. And now the next generation of Billie Eilish coming up, and you just see moments where she just becomes a total fangirl, which is really nice to see. You know, she's not trying to hide and be cool about it. Like, she's a big Justin Bieber fan. And you have it where you can tell Justin Bieber is kind of like the Katy Perry thing, where he is reaching out to this new young artist and trying to lend his wisdom to her and be this comforting presence that maybe he wished he had when he was on his rise as a star. And I couldn't help but think too, because I remember when I worked at a movie theater, that around the time that I was working at a movie theater, his movie Never Say Never came out. And when I thought about a movie like Never Say Never to something like The World's a Little Blurry, you can see how in even just about 10 years, how the industry has shifted, right? Where you have it where, and Never Say Never is a more typical documentary sort of capturing a star's life, a moment in the star's life, right? It's you can definitely tell it's heavily manicured. It gives a little bit of his backstory, but it never shows Justin Bieber in like a bad light. You know, you can tell that it's a piece of artist propaganda. While with this movie, and also just in terms of it's interesting because Justin Bieber, he was part of the last generation of a sort of artist who was taken in the industry and raised up in a traditional way of, okay, you found this young talent, they're just getting started, okay, we're gonna use our corporate power to push them as an artist, right? While Billie Eilish, only 10 years later, mind you, she's definitely an artist of the internet, right? Her brother was a producer, she sang on the track, they put it on SoundCloud, and then through the power of the internet and Gen Z and an audience, they pulled her up and elevated her to the point where the record labels could not ignore her. So you're seeing this progression of like a Justin Bieber and then the next step of a Billie Eilish. But you also see how someone like a Billie Eilish has more power than a Justin Bieber, right? She definitely has a vision, and you see that even in this movie that she's exerting a lot of control. Sometimes it comes off as kind of pushy and whatnot, but in terms of how I felt about it, I actually felt more positive about it, because I'm thinking, okay, she has this fame, she has this media circus around it, so at the very least, she should have a huge say in what she's doing if she's going to be put through this grueling task of being a pop star. And it lets me feel comforted, because I get the feeling that someone like a Justin Bieber, he probably started acting out in certain ways like he did because of how heavily manicured the record label is trying to make him be, while someone like a Billie Eilish is being allowed to exert more control of her career. So I'm hopeful for her, and I think that she's an artist definitely to watch. If I were to say the movie really has any flaws to it, I would just say that it is very unstructured, so it doesn't have typical narrative arcs as the same way as a certain kind of movie. And also, the movie's 2.5 hours. There's definitely a point in the movie when I was watching it, when you hit around the hour and a half mark, where it feels like the movie should stop, but then it keeps going for like another hour almost. So, but I'm sure if you're a fan of Billie Eilish, that's not a problem. You just want to see more of her. But it was, when I thought of a criticism, that was one that I would definitely give it. So I think I would give Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry, a solid 7 out of 10. A solid 7 out of 10. I don't think it's groundbreaking, but I definitely think it was more interesting than I was expecting it to be. But also, let's just be real, she's a really young artist. You know, she hasn't had a super long career yet, so maybe they'll make another one of these when she's maybe like 25 or something and she's lived more life and whatnot, and maybe that'll be more interesting. But for now, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. So if you dug this review, Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.